My name is Olga Kurilenko, and I'm 32 years old. I'm also the person my parents believed they could discard like yesterday's newspaper, then retrieve from the recycling bin whenever they felt nostalgic. 5 years ago, my sister told them I'd dropped out of medical school. She didn't just lie. She weaponized the one thing I'd ever done that made them look at me like I mattered. That single, calculated lie cost me my entire family, or so I thought. Then, last month, something happened that forced us all to finally see each other clearly. Before we get into this, I need you to understand something. I was the invisible daughter for 28 years. My sister Monica was born 3 years before me, and from the hospital nursery forward, she had a gravitational pull that made everyone orbit around her. She was the kind of kid who could charm a teacher into believing she hadn't done the homework because she'd been volunteering at an animal shelter. She was beautiful in that effortless way that doesn't require work, tall, blonde, the kind of face that made strangers smile at her. She played violin. She went to Yale. She dated boys our parents approved of immediately. She was the answer to every question my parents had about what success looked like. And then I got into Johns Hopkins Medical School, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't a supporting character in Monica's story. I need to paint this precisely so you understand what she was protecting. Our parents are Russian immigrants who came to America with nothing. They worked their bones into dust so their daughters could have opportunity. Success in their world wasn't just success, it was redemption. It was proof that their sacrifice meant something. For decades, Monica carried that weight perfectly. She was their American dream made flesh. And then I applied to medical school and got in, and suddenly my mother had 2 daughters to brag about at her book club. I still remember the moment everything shifted. It was the end of my first semester at Johns Hopkins. I'd called Monica to tell her about my anatomy practical. I'd gotten a 98 and the professor had written exceptional spatial reasoning on my exam. It was stupid to be proud of this, but I was. I'd worked 16-hour days that semester. I'd missed parties, skipped social events, cut my own hair to save money. This score was proof that I belonged there. "That's great," Monica said, and I heard something in her voice, a tightness like someone smiling through gritted teeth. "Mom's been telling everyone about your grades. It's actually kind of annoying. She brought it up at Dad's partner's dinner like I wasn't the one who graduated summer cum laude." I didn't know what to say. I'd never asked her to diminish my wins. I'd never wanted to be the reason she felt small. I just wanted one thing that was mine. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it, but the apology came with a hollow feeling, like I was sorry for existing in a way that mattered. She called me 2 weeks later. "I'm concerned about you," she said. Her voice had shifted into that clinical tone she uses when she's about to deliver bad news. "I think you're pushing yourself too hard. Have you considered that maybe medical school isn't right for you? You seem stressed. Maybe you should explore other options before you get in too deep." I believed her. God, I was so stupid. I believed every word. She'd always been right about things. She was older. She was successful. She had perspective. So when she followed up that concern with a question about whether I'd been struggling with my coursework, whether I'd thought about talking to an advisor about maybe taking a semester off, I listened. I didn't confide in her about the depression that had started in October. That wasn't her business. But I did tell her that yes, it was hard, and yes, sometimes I wondered if I was smart enough to keep up. I told her about the night I'd cried in the library at 2 a.m. because I got a 74 on my first biochemistry quiz. I was feeding her ammunition, though I didn't have the language for it then. By January, my parents believed their youngest daughter was a fraud who'd gotten into medical school by accident and was now crumbling under the weight of her own inadequacy. My mother called me on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was walking to campus, and I had to sit down on a bench outside the medical school building, the building where my name was posted on the dean's list, and listened to her tell me that Monica had said I was struggling emotionally, and that she was concerned I was in denial about my limitations. She delivered this information like she'd heard it from a medical expert, like Monica hadn't just spent a month poisoning the well. "Monica is worried about you," my mother said in Belarusian, which meant the conversation had reached a level of severity that required our first language. "She says you cry every day. She says you talk about how stupid you are. She thinks you're not handling the pressure. We raised you to be honest, Olga. If you can't do this, we need to know. We can support you, but you must tell us the truth." I felt the ground disappear beneath me. "Mom, I didn't say any of that to Monica. I don't know where she—" "Don't lie to us," my father's voice came through the phone now. They were on speaker, they were in this together. Monica has no reason to make this up. Why would she worry about you if it wasn't serious? Because she's afraid I'm becoming more successful than she is, I said, and I heard the hysteria in my voice, the way I sounded unhinged compared to Monica's careful worry. Because I told her I was stressed, which is normal, and she twisted it into something it's not. Silence, a long, damning silence. I don't understand how you can speak about your sister this way, my mother said finally. Monica has always helped us, she would never. I'm not lying to you, I said. I'm not dropping out, I'm not struggling, I'm doing fine, I made the dean's list this semester. Monica told us about the dean's list, my father said. She said it's a very low bar at Johns Hopkins, that everyone makes it. Everyone, my achievement had become a participation trophy in their minds, a consolation prize distributed to mediocrity. What happened next was the textbook collapse of a relationship. They didn't believe anything I told them. When I sent them documentation, my actual grades, my dean's letter, an email from my advisor confirming I was in the top 5% of my class, they accepted it the way someone accepts a medical test result that contradicts their self-diagnosis. It was an anomaly, a bureaucratic error, a misunderstanding. I called my mother 14 times in the first 5 days. The first 3 went to voicemail. By the 4th, my father's number was blocked. I sent 2 emails from my university account, explaining in clinical, careful language what had actually happened. She responded once, "We will need time, your father is very hurt, please don't contact us." I sent a handwritten letter. It came back marked return to sender. I tried reaching out through Monica, which was a mistake of astronomical proportions. She picked up on the second ring, and her voice was so pleasant, so concerned. "Oh, Olga, I'm so glad you called. Have you thought any more about taking a semester off? Mom and Dad just want what's best for you. There's no shame in admitting this was too much." I hung up, and then I realized what she'd done, what she'd actually accomplished. She'd taken the one thing that made our parents see me and she'd burned it down, not to help me, to protect her own position as their singular success story. That was 5 years ago. I finished medical school. I completed my residency in emergency medicine at a hospital in Boston. I built a life 3,000 miles away from my parents' house in Connecticut, a life where I was competent and respected and seen. I had a mentor, Dr. Sarah Chen, the emergency department director, who became more of a mother to me than my actual mother had ever been. She taught me how to set boundaries, how to build self-worth from competence instead of family approval, how to survive the kind of pain that comes from people choosing a lie over you. They made their choice, Sarah told me once when I was still raw, still checking my phone to see if they'd called. You make yours now, and your choice gets to be that you're worth more than their belief in you. I believed her mostly. The mostly is important. There's a part of you that never stops being a child hoping your parents will finally see you as good enough. That part of me sent a message to my mother on my 30th birthday, just to say hello. She didn't respond. That part of me made a list of reasons they might finally believe me, reasons they might finally call. That part of me was working on forgiveness, the way people work on their tennis serve, with practice and hope and the belief that someday it would land. Then last month my sister had a car accident. A drunk driver hit her Honda head-on I-91, and she was airlifted to the closest trauma center, which happened to be Boston Medical. By the time I finished my shift in the ED and checked my messages, she'd already been in surgery for 6 hours. My father had left me a voicemail. In 4 years, he'd never left me a voicemail. The message was 5 seconds. "Olga, if you see this, your sister was in an accident. We're driving up now. Please help her." The clinical part of me assessed this as what it was, an emergency. The human part of me felt something splinter in my chest. I found her floor and walked into her room. She was unconscious, stabilized after a splenectomy and multiple orthopedic repairs. Her left leg was elevated in traction. There were tubes running from her arms, from her nose, from her bladder. She looked smaller than I remembered, younger, and for a moment I just stood there and looked at my sister, the architect of my exile, and felt something I didn't have a name for. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated, the recognition that I was about to save the life of someone who had tried to destroy mine, and I would do it because that's who I'd become. My parents arrived 4 hours later. I was in Monica's room when the door opened, and time did something weird. It collapsed and expanded simultaneously. My mother looked older. My father had lost weight. They both stopped moving when they saw me, like they'd walked into the wrong room and were trying to figure out where the exit was. Olga, my mother said, just my name, just that. She's stable, I said, and I heard the doctor's voice come out, precise, professional, untethered from emotion. The splenectomy went well. No major organ damage. Orthopedic surgery repaired her femur and fibula. She regained consciousness briefly 2 hours ago. The main risk now is infection, so we're running IV antibiotics every 6 hours. She'll need physical therapy starting tomorrow if she's cleared. She's going to recover. I delivered the information like she was anyone else's family member. I delivered it like I hadn't spent 5 years not knowing if my parents were alive, like I hadn't sent 1 email per year, always on December 26, always saying the same thing. Hi Mom and Dad, I hope you're well, I love you. Like clockwork into silence. My father sat down, literally folded into the chair beside Monica's bed. We didn't know you were working here, he said finally. I've been working here for 3 years, I said, since I completed my residency. My mother looked at Monica, unconscious and broken, and then she looked at me. Thank you for being here, she said, and her voice sounded like it was coming from far away. Thank you for taking care of her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever been grateful to me for anything. I wanted to make her understand that gratitude for doing my job as a doctor was not the same as seeing me, believing me, defending me. But instead, I said, I'll check on her every 4 hours, try to get some rest, and I walked out of that room like it was any other patient interaction. Because that's who I'd become, someone who could separate her devastation from her duty. Monica woke up on the 3rd day. I was the one who told her the extent of her injuries, and she cried, and I held her hand in the clinical way I'd been trained to, offering comfort without involvement. Her parents had gone to get coffee. We were alone. I'm sorry, she said, it wasn't what I expected. For everything, for what I did, for lying. I looked at this woman who'd spent years being my nemesis, and I realized she was terrified. The accident had broken something in her besides her bones. It had broken the story she'd been telling herself about who she was. She was no longer the golden child. She was a woman in a hospital bed with a shattered leg, facing months of recovery, facing a future where she might never walk the same way again. Why, I asked, why did you do it? She closed her eyes. Because for the first time in my life I felt like I was losing, like I'd always been first and suddenly you were ahead of me, and I panicked. I was so scared that I wasn't special anymore, and I thought if I could just prove that you didn't really belong there, that you weren't really as smart as you seemed. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I thought I'd make myself bigger by making you smaller, and it worked. It actually worked. And I've spent 5 years watching you build a life without me, knowing that I'd destroyed the one person I should have been able to count on. I didn't forgive her in that moment. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process, and it has prerequisites, and neither of us had met them yet. But I did sit with her. And I did listen, and I did something that mattered. I told her the truth. I spent 5 years thinking I wasn't good enough, I said. I spent 5 years believing my parents when they believed your lie. And I had to rebuild every single thing about myself with the help of people who chose me, not because they were obligated to, but because they believed I was worth it. You don't get to have that back automatically. But Monica, I'm telling you what I had to learn. The version of yourself you tried to destroy doesn't actually exist. You were always going to matter less to them once you weren't the only thing they were proud of. That's not your failing, that's theirs. And you can either keep playing that game, or you can figure out who you are when you're not competing with me. She cried. I stood there and didn't cry because I was at work, and I was a professional, and I had already cried enough for both of us 5 years ago. What happened next was slow. There were no grand reconciliations, no family dinners where everything was healed with vodka and apologies. What happened was smaller and more real. My father started coming to the hospital every day during Monica's recovery, and he'd sit in the cafeteria while I worked, and sometimes he'd ask me about my shift. These were 3-sentence conversations. How was your shift? Busy, 12 traumas. That must be stressful. It is. But they were conversations, and they mattered. My mother brought me food, borscht pelmeni, the things she'd made for Monica but never thought to bring to me. The first time she showed up with a container, I almost told her not to bother. But Sarah found me in the break room, tears I didn't know were falling, and she sat with me while I ate my mother's food and grieved all the meals that had come too late. They're trying, Sarah said. That's not the same as forgiveness, but it's not nothing. Monica's recovery took 4 months. By the end of it, I'd had more conversations with my family than in the previous 5 years. None of them were easy. None of them erased the time that had been lost. My mother still believed at some level that the lie had been partly true. My father still hadn't said he was sorry. Monica had apologized so many times that the word had lost meaning. But they showed up. They kept showing up. And I made a decision that took me 6 weeks of therapy to feel okay about. I decided to believe in the possibility of something new, not the resurrection of something dead. I need you to understand something, I told them. We were in Monica's apartment where she was finishing her recovery. I'd been invited for dinner, the first family dinner I'd had with them in 5 years. There were 4 plates on the table. I'm not the same person I was when you last saw me, and you're not the same people. What we do now, if we do anything, is build something new. It's not going to be what you lost. It's not going to look normal, but it can be honest. My mother nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me that it could be the way it was before. That's when I knew she'd finally understood. I need consistent honesty, I continued. I need you to believe me about my own life, my own accomplishments, my own struggles. I need Monica to build an actual apology through changed behavior, not just words. And I need all of you to understand that I don't owe you forgiveness. I'm choosing to move forward. That's not the same thing. They agreed because they didn't have a choice. They could either accept a daughter and sister on her terms, or not have one at all. 5 months later, I can tell you that it's working, but it's weird. It's 4 plates on a table where one person used to be missing, and nobody's pretending that's not strange. It's my father asking me about my day and actually listening instead of waiting for his turn to talk. It's my mother bringing me food that I don't have to feel guilty about eating. It's Monica in physical therapy, struggling with exercises that would be easy for her if she hadn't spent years not trying, learning what it means to build something through effort instead of talent. And it's me, 32 years old, finally understanding that my parents' love isn't the kind I needed all along. It's conditional and delayed and sometimes still doubting, but Sarah loves me without condition. My colleagues respect me without reservation. I love myself. I built that from scratch, brick by brick, in the space where my family couldn't reach me. The thing I want you to know, if you're reading this because you're living something similar, is this: waiting for people to see you is a way of letting them control your vision. I wasted 5 years hoping my parents would finally believe what they should have believed all along. Those 5 years weren't a waste. They made me a doctor, a mentor to residents, a woman who understands what it means to build yourself from the ground up. But I could have had them and still had my family. Except I couldn't, because my sister was scared, because my parents were limited, because the narrative they'd constructed was more comfortable than the truth. The truth doesn't expire. It doesn't matter if it takes 5 days or 5 years or a car accident on the highway. The truth sits there, patient and undeniable, waiting for someone to finally choose it over the lie that's easier to live with. I didn't have to make that choice for them. I just had to make the choice for myself, which was, I'm going to be brilliant whether they see it or not. I'm going to be loved whether they love me or not. I'm going to survive. And then when they finally woke up and wanted back in, I was going to decide if I wanted them. And I did, but on my terms. 4 plates, one of them used to be empty. It's not a perfect ending. Perfect isn't real, but it's honest and it's present and it's what we're building now. If you're waiting for your family to finally see you, stop waiting. See yourself first. Build the life that matters to you, find the people who believe in you without conditions, and then, when your family finally comes back to the table, you'll know exactly what you're worth. You'll already have proofs.